What's up, guys? 3-1 day yesterday. I'll take it. 5 winning days in the last 6. Definitely will take that. The Philadelphia 76ers one was the only one that didn't get there, although a couple of the other ones got kind of dicey as well. St. John's, nice easy win to start out the day. Philadelphia 76ers, I mean, that game statistically, I would have to look at it again, but that game did not look like a game where the Sixers should have gotten blown out statistically. I just don't know what to say about that otherwise. I think they had way more possessions than the Bucks did. Let me see. It was just the shooting percentages were just so discrepant between the two teams. The Bucks shot 54.4% from the field, almost 50% from three-point range, hitting 18 threes, although the Sixers wound up with 16 threes. But the Sixers had almost 20 more field goal attempts. They had 18 more field goal attempts, but they only shot 37% from the floor. So they, even with the 2-point field goal percentage shooting, the 2-point shooting, they were just way behind. It was just kind of an outlier as far. I feel like I keep saying that, but you look at the box scores, and that is kind of the case where like the rebound discrepancy was really close. Sixers only had 6 fewer rebounds, I guess, which isn't that bad. They did have 7 fewer free throw attempts. They were -5 from the free throw line. They're only -2 3-pointers, so -6 from beyond the arc. But from the rest of the shooting, they were only 36 for 97 from the floor. And Milwaukee was 43 for 79. So one team shooting 54.4% and the other shooting 37.1%. Not something that you see every day, really. Milwaukee was just really hot shooting, and it just kind of didn't stop. And Philadelphia had, like I said, they had fewer turnovers. They had way more shot attempts. So that's the type of game where even though you start jacking up shots when you're way behind it, the statistics just don't look like a blowout like the final score was. So it's just bad. I mean, it is what it is. But the 76ers had, I think, double the amount of points off of turnovers, 28-14 or something like that. So you outscore a team 28-14 off of turnovers, and you wind up losing by 21 points. You just don't see that very often. The shooting discrepancy was just completely insane, with Philadelphia taking 18 more field goal attempts, yet somehow having 6 fewer made field goals. So I don't know what else to say about that. And then the other 2 games, I think I was right, but they both got there, but they still did get dicey with the Pittsburgh Penguins not being able to, I guess, defend or not being able to goaltend at all. I think it was Jari was in net again. He is not good at all. It got to a point where Pittsburgh, I think, had the shot advantage for the entire game. And there was a point in the game where they had been winning 4-2, and they had they allowed Philadelphia to tie it before the end of the second period. It was 4-2, and then the entire lead was gone in 5 minutes or something. It was like, how could you not maintain a lead like this? Pittsburgh just kept blowing leads over and over again. At that point, once it became 4-4 after they blew the 4-2 lead, Pittsburgh had a 22-14 shot edge. It's like, how the hell does Philadelphia have 4 goals on only 14 shots on goal? That's just bad goaltending. Can't trust the Penguins, although I liked the spot that they were in there, and they did wind up doing it. They wound up having another 2-goal lead in the third period after blowing the first one. They took another 2-goal lead at 6-4, almost wound up blowing that. It was 6-5, but then they pushed it to 7-5, and then it wound up a 7-6 final. Just a crazy game where I think just both teams just could not play defense. They're just kind of more surprising on the Pittsburgh side. At least Philadelphia has an excuse, which is why I was on the game, is that Philadelphia had played a really tough game against the Rangers the day before that and had no time off. So you don't necessarily expect them to have really intense defense coming into the game. Pittsburgh, with whatever it was, 2 days off, you don't expect their defense to be as bad as it was, or maybe their goaltending to be as bad as it was. Maybe he was just cold because of having the days off. I really don't know, but at least Pittsburgh still wound up getting there, having to lay a price to do it too, though. So that got a little bit dicey. And then the Utah Jazz, I don't know what happened with them, man. They were dominating the game. They only allowed 39 points in the entire first half. They were winning by 24 at halftime. I'm like, all right, this is a win. This game's over. Then I look in the fourth quarter, and they're only up like 8. I'm like, what the hell? Like, what just happened? Now they're 1 point away or 1.5 points away from not covering the 6.5. I think at some points the line actually got up to 7 during the day. I don't know how you blow a 24-point lead and all of a sudden it's 8 to the San Antonio Spurs. I guess the Jazz kind of got complacent, but then another like quick moment later, you turn around. I wasn't watching the game, but you turn around, flash again, and then all of a sudden it's like the final minute of the game. Utah's back up 21, and it's like, okay, well, it's a win as it should be. That's just bizarre. You have a 24-point lead, let it slip all the way down to 8, and then in the final couple of minutes, you somehow pushed it all the way back up above 20. Whatever, but go Utah. We get the win on the day. We get the win on that game. Moving to today, Monday, it's a pretty short card. There isn't much that I want to get involved in. You got most of college basketballs in the MEAC and the SWAC and whatever, and I'm like, yeah, those are like the two lowest conferences and the conferences that I tend to not get involved in at all. I'll dabble in like all the other conferences, but yeah. And then you got the bigger games where the bigger games aren't that interesting to me either necessarily, where you got Kansas State as a big favorite at home against West Virginia, who's the worst team in the Big 12. K-State's up from 9.5 to 10. I don't think K-State's in a good spot. I was just on them on Saturday, and they had a big win at home over a ranked BYU team in revenge. So I would have to imagine that K-State is not really in a good spot here. That's a letdown spot. But West Virginia played tough on Saturday, too, at Iowa State. They were in that game for most of it. I mean, Iowa State does play lower scoring games a lot of the time, but West Virginia, that's a tough physical battle. So I don't want to grab points with West Virginia coming off a tough game against Iowa State like that either. So I think both of those teams are in a negative spot. Might not be ready to play like as intense defense as you might see otherwise, which is why the total in that game is shot up from 138 to 142.5, I would imagine. So I'm not getting involved in that. And Miami at UNC, I'm not getting involved in that either. North Carolina, 14-point favorite. I mean, North Carolina is obviously the better team, but they're coming off a pretty big win at Virginia. That's a tough game. You go into Virginia. Virginia plays really good defense. That was an insanely low-scoring game. Virginia just couldn't score at all, which sometimes tends to be the case with them. And now North Carolina's facing Miami, who they already beat in Miami, and they got NC State next, which NC State not that great this year, but they're in the upper half of the ACC, and it's still a North Carolina revenge game, North Carolina rivalry game, even though it is going to be revenge for NC State because North Carolina already beat them at NC State. So it is possible they don't take Miami totally seriously here. I don't know. And Miami's not doing anything. They're not making the tournament. Miami's on a huge loss streak right now, 6-game loss streak, and they just had probably the most unacceptable loss at home to Georgia Tech. That's pretty bad. I mean, Georgia Tech, as not great as Miami has been this year, that's still, Miami was an 8.5-point favorite, and they were just getting pretty much dominated in the second half of that game. That's not good. So I would lean to the Miami side in this one against North Carolina, just because North Carolina has this sandwich in between two bigger games. It is revenge. Road reversal revenge for Miami. I would only take the points with Miami, but it's just so many points. There's just a pretty big gap between the talent level of these two teams. The only game I'm going to be on, you guys know what I'm going to be on. We have another situation where we have a ranked road team against an unranked home favorite here. The unranked home favorite is TCU against Baylor. TCU's up from 2 to 2.5. I think it's probably still 2.5 everywhere. I don't know. Let me see here. Yeah, I think 2.5 is the best you can do. And KenPom, what does KenPom have this at? I think he has it a little bit lower than this, so it gets a little dicey. He does have Baylor as the better team. He has TCU by 1, so difference between 1 and 2.5, not really that much. I like the spot for TCU, and I think TCU is the undervalued commodity here, and Baylor might be a little bit overrated too at 11. KenPom has them as the 14th best team. Problem with Baylor is that their defense is awful, so if you're playing TCU here, you're playing the home team and you're playing the team that has the better defense in TCU. TCU's defense is significantly better than Baylor's, and their offense isn't really that much worse than Baylor's either in offensive efficiency. TCU also plays a way faster pace game. Or, yeah, they do. 66th in tempo on KenPom. Baylor, you kind of, because they score so much, they have a really good offense. You kind of consider Baylor to, you think about them as a fast team, but they're not. They're at 286th in tempo on KenPom. TCU way, way faster at 66. So if TCU is able to speed up the game, I think that bodes well for TCU. I don't think this is a good spot for Baylor in any way, except for the fact that would you think that Baylor is going to still be focused on this game just because it's a revenge game? Because TCU did beat them at Baylor, but that was a game that went into triple overtime. But that game was also played at TCU's pace as well, even though Baylor was winning for a lot of that game. Baylor could never pull away. TCU hung around in the game. The shooting was pretty good on both teams there. The TCU was 40% from three, and they got out-rebounded. So that scares me a little bit coming into this game playing TCU, because TCU kind of shot a little bit of an outlier. But then if you dig into the from three, but if you dig into the box score a little bit, neither team hit that many threes. So that wasn't really the difference here. TCU had 8 threes in the game. Baylor had 5. Like, those are both pretty low totals, low 3-point totals there. TCU did have more field goal attempts than Baylor in the game, even though they got out rebounded. They had fewer turnovers, and Baylor really, really outshot them from the free throw line. So Baylor had 10 more free throws and 14 more free throw attempts than TCU did in that game. Some home cooking for Baylor there. And Baylor still didn't win the game. So that kind of tells me something. TCU actually outplayed them in that game. And the score, even though it was triple overtime, was so high that that's indicative that TCU was actually able to speed up the game more than Baylor kind of likes to play the game. So TCU, if they're able to speed up the game even on the road at Baylor, I would expect them to be able to do it at home too. And the fact that Baylor had 10 more points from the free throw line in that game and still didn't win the game. That actually tells me that TCU actually was the better team in the game in a lot of ways, and played the better game, especially when the amount of field goals and 3-point field goals from each team wasn't really that discrepant in the game. So as far as the revenge motive, I don't think the revenge motive is going to be that strong for Baylor here. And it's for mostly because of the spot that Baylor is in here. I think Baylor is in a really horrific spot where if this wasn't revenge for Baylor for losing on their home floor to TCU, I would like this even more, but I still like it. Just because I think TCU controlled that game, and it seems like there might be a matchup issue here where TCU has they're better able to match up. But look at what Baylor's coming off of, man. They went into BYU. They had to go out to Utah in the middle of the week last week, and they lost that game, which I was on. I was on BYU in that one. It was a good spot for BYU to get some revenge there for having lost to BYU, having lost to Baylor, at Baylor. Baylor had played pretty tough in that game, but they lost. BYU won and covered for me in that one. Then what did Baylor just do on Saturday? Now they have a quick turnaround time, only one day off after they just played Houston, which was like their battle of the year. Houston came into their house, and Houston led big throughout the first half of that game. Baylor made an epic comeback. I saw a stat during the game. Up until Baylor actually wound up taking the lead on the first shot in overtime in that game, up until that point, Houston had not trailed in any game since February 10th. So they'd gone 2 weeks without even trailing in a game, which is insane. And Houston was leading this entire game against Baylor. They didn't even trail at the beginning of the game, and they had a big lead. Baylor put in a huge effort and came all the way back. Houston had a pretty off 3-point shooting game in the game, really. Although Baylor did also play pretty well and out-rebound them. Baylor made an epic comeback, came all the way back against a really great Houston defense, the number 2 ranked team in the country. Baylor was able to tie the game, send it into overtime, and then actually take the lead in overtime on the first shot. But then they kind of just fizzled out, and Houston retook the lead and didn't give it up again. That was the only point that Houston was behind when it was 71-69 in overtime or something like that. And Baylor wound up losing the game. I don't know how you turn around off of that, man. Baylor, even though, they lost at home to TCU, this is such a bad spot for Baylor coming off that epic game against Houston. I don't see how you turn around after that, man, with only one day off. And then who do they have up next? They have Kansas, who they only lost to by 3 on the road at Kansas. Kansas is like one of the blue bloods of the conference, man. It's always a big deal when you face Kansas. Kansas, Texas, and Houston basically are Like, those are the teams that you really get up for the most in this conference, I would say. Maybe not Texas at this one because they're down a little bit this year, but they're still like a name team, a blue blood. But Kansas is a highly ranked team, a top 10 ranked team, and the blue blood of the conference. So that's like a huge game, and it's revenge coming up towards the end of the week. I think that's actually Saturday this week, so that's Baylor's next game. But still, I don't think this is a good spot for Baylor. They're having to go on the road, although it's a pretty short trip, really, up to Fort Worth, Texas. And they're obviously used to playing there. But coming off that Houston game, I don't know what Baylor is going to have left in the tank, man. I think it's got to be a massive hangover spot when you almost beat the number 2 team, the team that's leading your conference, in a real tough battle where you're playing one of the best, most physical defenses in college basketball, whereas TCU had a much easier game and beat one of my bets, beating Cincinnati. Not a big game, really. They beat Cincinnati very easily, though. Maybe a little bit of a misleading final score, but now they host Baylor. I like it. The market looks like it's indicating on Baylor. It's a very tough spot for Baylor, despite the slight revenge angle there. TCU's gone up from 2 to 2.5. I expect Baylor's going to be the public team because the public's going to come in and look at this and say, wait a minute, Baylor, they're playing with revenge here. That's probably going to be what the public thinks because the game was so close at Baylor. People are going to think, well, Baylor's the better team. They're going to really get revenge here, right? And we're getting points with Baylor as the better team, the 11th ranked team against an unranked TCU team. It's so easy. How are we getting points here? I think that'll probably be the public mindset here. I kind of expect Baylor to wind up being the public team. I mean, they're the team that carries more name recognition as well, but it's a bad spot. It's a sandwich spot for Baylor. Like I said, a massive sandwich spot if you don't weigh that revenge angle really that heavily, which I think revenge gets weighed too heavily by a lot of people, as I say, although I factor it into some of these games, but you got to take other factors into account as well. And then, of course, this is a game, as I said at the beginning, TCU, it's one of those angles that's been a huge moneymaker in college basketball this year. Although you see the books might be starting to adjust a little bit for this, where you have a home unranked favorite against a ranked road underdog. That is the case here. The books seem like they've been adjusting these lines a little bit, like maybe they did in that New Mexico game that I lost on whenever that was. It was at some point last week, but I got in on a better number on that New Mexico game, and I still kind of think it was the right side. But for TCU, I don't think this line has been over adjusted, really. As I said, KenPom has it at 1. You can get it at like 2.5 right now, which, yeah, it's laying more than a bucket, but it's still pretty close to picking the winner. You could go money line on this if you really wanted to. You might be able to get a cheap money line in TCU, especially when the game tips off, because I do think Baylor will probably wind up being the public team here, and probably the books know they can't over adjust this too much in the direction of TCU because they still want to split the action. And I think because Baylor's going to get a lot of public action, I think if they move it too much, they're going to get hammered on the Baylor side and be way too lopsided on the Baylor side. Although it is possible they're still going to be lopsided on the Baylor side, even with the number where it is now. And maybe they're just okay with that because maybe they will take the chance and think that there's a better chance that TCU will cover than what the VIG is, basically, because the books, they want to split the action more than anything else so that they have an even amount of money on both sides. So they'll just collect the VIG because they charge you 11 to win 10. So if the action is evenly split on both sides, they'll win regardless of the outcome. So that's really their goal, though some games, obviously, the action is not split. And this might be one of the games like that where maybe they're just taking even a little bit of a stand on TCU still, where those kind of look like trap lines, or like the books aren't that stupid. Like they know what they're doing. And sometimes they'll just take a shot and like expect there to be lopsided action on, in this case, probably the Baylor side, but they'll be okay with that because they think there's a better chance that TCU covers than what the odds are actually giving them. So all that being said, I'm rambling. This video is going to take way. I thought this was going to be a quick video with only 3 plays, but let's get it done, man. So Baylor minus 2.5, going over into the NBA. The one game I'm going to be on here, and I would keep in mind, by the way, there have been some injuries and suspensions in the NBA. I didn't mention yesterday. Maybe I should have taken the Atlanta Hawks yesterday because that line did move a bit. It dropped from the Hawks as a 4-point favorite down to like a 1-point favorite. And they closed like a 2-point favorite with juice because it went back up. But that line moved because Trae Young got injured in the previous game. So that was an injured player theory spot for the Hawks. I just didn't love playing the Hawks in that spot just because the Magic were coming off a game where they didn't play very well against the Pistons. So I thought that both teams might show up for that game. But the Hawks did win without Young in the injured player theory spot. So I forgot to mention that on my video yesterday that I had a lean to the Hawks, but it wasn't very strong. And then today, I will mention that if you look at the Heat Kings line, the line has gone up from 2.5 to 7 on the Kings with juice. But the money, you got 59% of the tickets and 89% of the cash over on the other side on the Heat. So the Heat have the cash discrepancy. It seems like a lot of the bettors, even the professional bettors, are thinking this line is an overreaction. You might look at this line like, wait a minute, why are the Kings a 7-point favorite going through the 7? That's because Jimmy Butler is suspended, so he's missing this game. I think he might only be suspended for one game, but there was a brawl in the Heat's prior game between the Heat and the Pelicans, and I think 3 players got suspended, or maybe more than 3. Maybe it was 5. I don't know, but Butler was the key name out of all the players that got suspended. On the Pelicans played yesterday in the suspended spot, and they didn't do well. They actually got some of the money, and the line got pushed up to 5 on the Pelicans somehow. They didn't do well against the Bulls. Although I don't remember if the Bulls were coming off like a pretty tough game against the Celtics. I don't remember, but the Pelicans still didn't play well in the suspension spot. There, suspension is harder to gauge than the injured player spot. The suspended player spot, it's hard to gauge like if the team's gonna be like, are they gonna like rally like around that the player being out, or are they gonna be like kind of a like defeated team? Is it gonna go the other way? I think with the injury, it's like almost always the team rallies to account for that player's injury, but the suspension, it could go either way. Like it could be that team's off like a really emotional game, which is why those players got suspended, and maybe they're just gonna like not be in the greatest emotional state or mental state going into the next game. So I don't know which way this is going to go for the Heat. I'm not playing this game, but I figured I'd just point it out because Butler is injured. So that's why he's suspended, as I keep talking, but Butler is suspended for the brawl against the Pelicans. So that's why this line has gone up from 2.5 to 7 on the side of the Kings. That seems like an over adjustment to Butler being up. And I know the Heat are dealing with some injuries too, like Hero. He's going to be your hero. Hero. He's Hero, everybody. I don't know if he's playing or not because he's been dealing with an injury. They've had a couple of guys dealing with injuries on that Heat team. So I don't know if he's going to be in the lineup or not tonight. So it's a game to like watch the personnel, like watch for the reports, like who's going to actually be playing in that game, the Heat Kings. But I'm just going to stay off that game completely. I don't want to get involved with so many moving parts there. It's pretty tough to figure out, although Sacramento is coming off a big game where they went into LA and beat the Clippers by 16 points. That's a huge win. And they have the Nuggets and the Timberwolves up next. So it is possible they overlooked the Heat, even though the last time they played the Heat, they lost on the road at Miami. But when this is sandwiched in between these big Western Conference games, they just had a nice statement win against the Clippers and with the Nuggets up in 2 days and then the T-Wolves, it's possible they don't totally focus on the Heat. And then with Butler not being there for the Heat, it's possible the Kings show even less focus. So if you're playing the Heat, that would be why. It would be mostly playing the Kings to not show up focused here. But then you got the Heat. I mean, they just beat the Pelicans on the road. They're playing a 4th straight road game on the road. After they played a tough game against the Celtics, were all these games, I don't know how many of these games are after the All-Star break as well, because they played a tough game against the Celtics. Yeah, those were all before the All-Star break. So the New Orleans game was the first game out of the All-Star break, and they still went in and won that game. But that was a big emotional game where a bunch of players got suspended, like I said. So are they going to still be totally focused against Sacramento, a team that they did just beat not that long ago at home? I don't know, but I think Sacramento is actually still in the worst spot here, coming off a bigger win. And Miami, I think, has more rest as well, but they're without Butler. But of course, like I said, the line is certainly accounting for Butler not being in the lineup, and it might be over adjusted to it. So I actually would slightly lean to the Heat in that one. But the game I'm actually going to be on is the Toronto Raptors plus 6.5. I don't know if it's going to get to 7 or not, but the Pacers are public. They do have the cash discrepancy too, which kind of worries me a little bit, but not that much, I would say. The Pacers, 77% of tickets, 85% of the cash for now. I don't know if we might see that shift. I did see the line drop to 6 at some points, and now it's back up to 6.5. This is a bad spot for Indiana, dude. They're on no rest. They're on a back-to-back. Although they're not going anywhere. They're still playing at home, but they played yesterday, and they beat the Dallas Mavericks by 22 points and scored 133. So who's going to not want to take the Pacers here, man? But look at that box score. The Pacers shot out of their minds. They shot 56% from the field. The game was a bit closer for a lot of it, even though, yeah, they did win by a lot in the end, and they pulled away at the end. But they shot their shooting percentage was a bit high, a bit of an outlier, I would say, a little bit unsustainable. Pacers look way too good, beating a pretty good team like the Mavericks with Luka, beating them by 22 points and putting up 133. Nobody's going to want to have anything to do with Toronto here after seeing Indiana doing that. Indiana putting up a ton of high point totals, and they've won 3 straight games, but those games were against the Raptors on the road, who they're playing now. So this sets up road reversal revenge as well, because the Pacers just went into Toronto and beat the Raptors in Toronto as a 2.5-point favorite. So the 2.5-point favorite would indicate that this line probably is about right. I guess at 6.5, like there's nothing to really glean from that. You get like about 2 points for home court in the NBA. So I think 6.5 is about a fair line, given that they were 2.5 on the road at the Raptors. So the Pacers went in and beat the Raptors, scored 127 in that game, beat the Raptors. So I think that's going to maybe cause the Pacers to get a little bit complacent here, because they did just beat the Raptors in Toronto. So coming off a huge blowout win over Dallas, and with New Orleans up for back-to-back games, they're playing New Orleans twice next. They might overlook the Raptors, having just beaten them and having this game sandwiched in between games against some of the better teams in the West. I'm not sure they're going to be totally focused against the Raptors, and with no time off. Yeah, I think it's a bad spot for Indiana. And the other win that they had in that win streak is they scored 129 points against the Pistons. But I mean, come on, it's the Pistons. Most teams beat the Detroit Pistons. But the Pacers have also been putting up these high point totals, 127 or more in the last 3 games. Nobody's going to want to go against the Pacers here, except me. I do, because of everything I just said. No rest. They're on a back-to-back. They just blew out the Mavericks by 22. They have the Pelicans up next, and they just beat the Raptors on their own floor in Toronto like a few games back. So all of that leads me to be on the Toronto Raptors side. It's a little bit of quick road reversal revenge. I think maybe you're getting a little bit of line value taking Toronto because of the recent play here. The Pacers look too good. I think there are multiple reasons that they'll overlook the Raptors here, as I already pointed out, having just beaten them in Toronto and having this game surrounded by bigger games against better teams from the Western Conference. Toronto, not a very good team, very bad record. Nobody's going to really pay that much attention to Toronto, but Toronto's quietly, they've won 2 games in a row. So I kind of like that in a way, just because I think that kind of starts like some momentum for them. So they beat the Brooklyn Nets, although was that before the All-Star break? I don't even know at this point. I don't know when the All-Star break actually ended for these teams. I know both these games are after the All-Star break. So they're actually 2-0 coming out of the All-Star break. So they went into the All-Star break on a bad note, losing to Indiana, and they came out of it and they've made some adjustments and they beat the Nets, which the Nets have not been playing well, sure, but nice win for Toronto to start some new momentum there. And then they went into Atlanta and beat the Atlanta Hawks, and now they have 2 days off. So I don't know, they're 2 days off going to disrupt their momentum a little bit. I'm not so sure about that. I think they're going to be focused on the Indiana team that just beat them right before the All-Star break on the 14th on Valentine's Day, showing them no love, going into their house and beating them. I expect Toronto is going to be the focus team here. They got some nice winning momentum here, breaking their bad losing momentum that they went into the All-Star break with. They've made some adjustments. They've been playing some better basketball since then against teams that are definitely beatable, but even so, now they get Indiana in a little bit of quick revenge, and Indiana's not in a good spot to be focused and has the way worse rest spot, and I don't think it's being factored into the line very much, really. So I like the Toronto Raptors plus 6.5. NHL real quick. Oh man, it's a short card, very few plays, and it's still going to be a long video because I ramble so much. Over in the NHL, I was looking at the Ottawa-Washington game first, and Ottawa's up from 106 to minus 117. Minus 106 to minus 117 is a road favorite. 81% of the tickets and 78% of the cash. So the market is indicating on Ottawa, but they have the cash discrepancy and the numbers moving towards them. But I don't like either team's spot here, man. I mean, Ottawa, In their last 3 games, they had a close 1-point loss at Florida. Then they beat the Dallas Stars at home and beat the Golden Knights, Vegas Golden Knights at home, the returning champs. So they're coming off a couple of big games. So it's like, are they really going to be focused on the Washington Capitals? Even though Washington, they've been playing pretty well recently. They have a decent record, but Ottawa's coming off a couple of big games, man. And then Washington's also they're returning home from a Florida road trip, which is not a very long road trip or a far road trip. It was only 2 games where they played the Florida road trip there and took 1 of 2, but they're coming off a game where they just lost to the Panthers 3-2. So they're coming off a tough game as well. So I don't like the spot that either of these teams are in. And that went into overtime as well. Now they're returning back home. Although I actually kind of think Ottawa's in the worst of the 2 spots here. So the fact that Ottawa's moving up on the in the market there, it looks like the market's indicating on Ottawa seems a little strange to me, but whatever, I guess, whatever. And then my Bruins, the Boston-Seattle spot is kind of interesting. It's a spot where I think the Bruins are in a bad spot, and they're down from minus 150 to minus 140 as a road favorite. So you can get a decent underdog price on Seattle. 81% of the tickets, but 96% of the cash, according to pregame, at least on Boston. I'm not sure if that's accurate because the line is also dropped on Boston. So I don't know if they actually have the cash discrepancy, although I definitely buy that they're going to be the public team here. The public will come in and see, oh, I'm getting the Bruins at kind of a short price here. Yeah, let's play the Bruins, whatever. Bruins are in a bad spot, though, dude. They've played 5 of their last 6 games, I believe, or 6 of their last 7 games now have all gone into overtime or shootout. That's got to take a lot out of you, man. You played that many games into overtime and shootout, and in their last 3 games have been in the Pacific Northwest. They're 1-2 on this road trip, which finishes tonight in Seattle. They beat Edmonton in a barn burner in overtime, 6-5. Then I went against them against Calgary, and they didn't have that much left the very next night, lost 3-2, and then they had to turn around and play again 2 days later in a third game in 4 nights at Vancouver, and they lost that game 3-2 in overtime as well against a good Vancouver team. Vancouver got some revenge against them for beating them 4-0. So I don't know if the Bruins are going to have much left here, man. They're coming off a big game, tough game against Vancouver. Even though they had just beaten Vancouver, they still played tough against Vancouver again. And now they're playing a 4th game in 6 days, all on the road. This is a really difficult spot. And they have Vegas up next when they return home. They return home for a 1-game homestand against Vegas on Thursday in 3 days, and they're facing Seattle. The only thing that gives me pause here is that Seattle just went into Boston and beat Boston, which is kind of an ugly game for the Bruins. So that might cause the Bruins to be focused a little bit. Even though it was the same thing was to be said for the Bruins Calgary, though. The Bruins had just lost 4-1. Same score, too, 4-1 to Calgary at home, and the Bruins did not play a good game, that great a game against Calgary, and wound up losing it. The Bruins, I think, showed up focused for the game against Calgary in that revenge spot there, but just couldn't do it just because this road trip and all these overtime games have taken so much out of them. So I expect them to not have much left in the tank for the game against Seattle here, even though Seattle did just come into their house and beat them. And for Seattle, they have 1 day off. They're staying at home. They did just beat Vancouver, so that gives me a little bit of pause. Although so did the Bruins a little while ago. The Bruins are 1-1 in the recent games against Vancouver. But in Seattle's last game 2 days ago, they lost at home pretty badly to Minnesota, and that was a bad spot for Seattle, sandwiched in between a big win, 5-2 over Vancouver, and having Boston up next, and then they lost 5-2 to Minnesota, sandwiched in there. I actually do like the spot for Seattle. I'm considering doing it, actually. This spot is just so bad for the Bruins. Getting Seattle as a home underdog. Am I going to be on 2 hockey games? Yeah, why not? We're going to grab 2 hockey underdogs here. So that's one of them, Seattle, plus 120 or whatever we can get here. Yeah, something like that. So the only thing that would give me any hesitation there is that revenge angle, but I think that's got to be a little bit overused. And then finally, I'm going to be on the New York Islanders. Dallas is in a bad spot. They're returning home from a 4-game road trip where they finally won a game on the road trip. A big win over the Carolina Hurricanes, a game I was on Dallas, and that game wasn't as good a spot for Carolina. And they have Colorado tomorrow. They have one home game against the Islanders, so I don't think anybody's going to be paying attention to, even though they did just lose to the Islanders in overtime at New York back on the 21st. I don't care about that. They have Colorado and Winnipeg coming up next. Colorado up tomorrow on the road, so I don't know if they're going to be totally focused. They're returning home, and they only have this one home game before they have to go back out on the road, so they have a very short time to get like their home affairs in order. So this looks like a very big-time distraction spot to me. A return home, which is the only game that you have at home. You got to get your home affairs in order, man. So I think this is a bad spot here for Dallas and New York Islanders. They're on a loss streak, lost a couple of games in a row. So I think they're probably in a better bounce back spot here. They have a day off. They lost at home to Tampa Bay. Now they get to go out on the road and kind of forget what just happened at home there. Put those distractions aside. So they're in the spot where they might be much more focused on hockey. Dallas is up from minus 165 to minus 169 on the money line, which scares me a little bit because it's moved up a little bit, and they have 95% of the tickets, but 95% of the cash, but 82% of the tickets, so the cash discrepancy is on. So that scares me a little bit too, but not enough to keep me off of it. It's going to be the Islanders plus 145 or whatever you can get. Have a good one, man. Let's kick off the week good. Peace.